Evolve 1.1 Level 1, Defining Evolution, Examining some of the Mechanisms of Evolution. So let's get started. Here are your vocabulary words: evolution, natural selection, distribution, normal distribution, allele frequency, phenotype, genotype, and gene pool. What's your confidence that you understand these words? You wrote down definitions. A 0 means I have no clue. I wrote down the definitions, but it didn't really mean anything. A 5, I am such a rock star. I would just like to take my test now. Go ahead and actually write down your level of confidence in these words. We'll revisit that level after we've had our discussion. So, evolution, what is it? Well, the simplest definition is that it's a change in a species over generations. And it's a powerful idea, the idea that a bunch of changes can get us from a simple organism like a one-celled ancestor species to complicated things like blue whales and maple trees and fungus and paramecium. That's amazing. But it's also a bit crazy for some people. It seems like a lot to take in. For most people, however, the idea that a single-celled organism could be the ancestor of a different kind of single-celled organism, that's a little easier to swallow. That doesn't seem unreasonable. Or that one of those single-celled organisms could be the ancestor species for some other more complicated microscopic life form. Or that any of those could be the ancestor species of, again, something still single-celled, still relatively simple, but a little more advanced. Or that these things could give rise to even more complicated primitive plants, that those primitive plants could maybe be the ancestors of slightly more exciting primitive plants, and that those primitive plants can be the ancestors of larger primitive plants, and so on, until we get to the point where we have some of the modern life forms we see. So again, evolution is a change in a species over many generations, but it's also best remembered that it's really a series of smaller steps, not usually giant leaps. Okay, so that's our first definition for evolution, a change in species over generations. Let's look at our second definition. Evolution is also defined as a shift in the distribution of traits within a population, because accumulations of tiny differences, shifts in lots of traits, can eventually lead to major differences if you give it enough time. All populations have variation. You remember this. The distribution of a trait is how that trait is spread out among members of the population. And that distribution might refer to color or stripe pattern. It might refer to height. It might refer to mass. It might refer to pinky length or head circumference, wingspan, all kinds of weird things. And what we very often do in biology is we graph those distributions. How is any trait distributed in any population? Well, very often it is in the form of what's called a normal distribution, sometimes called a bell curve, where the most common measurement sits right in the middle. And the measurements that are less common are out to the ends. So if we think about human height, for human females, average height is 5 foot 5 inches tall. Well, there are a whole lot of 5'4" to 5'6" women. They form the center of this normal distribution because there are so darn many of them. Now, does that mean that there are no 6 foot 5 inch women or 7 foot tall women? No, they exist, but there aren't a lot of them. Does that mean that there are no 3 foot 5 inch women or, 3 foot 7 women? No, they exist, but again, there aren't a lot of them. The vast majority of traits are distributed on a normal distribution. When this distribution shifts, that's evolution. Pretty simple. Evolution changes the distribution of a version of some trait. Sometimes average moves down or average moves up. Sometimes average goes away and we end up with sort of two hills to something. That's evolution. The population has changed. The distribution of a trait in that population has changed. Okay, that doesn't seem so hard. So again, what does a distribution show? It shows that there's variation. It shows how a trait is spread out among the members of a given population. We can use a distribution like this to figure out what percentage of individuals have some specific value for a trait. Ooh, we could do a study on rabbit ear length, and we could take 10 years of data, and we could go out and we could live trap rabbits, and we could sedate them, we could measure their little ears, and we could see if over that 10-year period, which is how many rabbit generations? A bunch, if there was a change in the average ear length. Ooh, are their ears getting longer? Are their ears getting shorter? Is there a reason? Can we tie it to some environmental change? I don't know, but it does sound like fun, doesn't it? Imagine petting all the little wild bunnies. Anyway, distributions show that variation exists. They show how the possible values of a trait are spread out. And when we have multiple distributions over time, they very often show that a population is or isn't changing. Let's review a few terms that you should have encountered in middle school when you did genetics. Phenotype. In middle school, you probably learned that the phenotype is the physical appearance of the organism. We are going to make that slightly more sophisticated because you're in high school now. We're going to note that phenotype isn't always physical appearance. It can also be the version of a trait caused by an organism's genes that you can't see. Huh? Well, what if you're colorblind? That's the physical reality caused by your genes, but you can't see that someone's colorblind by looking at them. What if you're lactose intolerant? Can you tell that someone's lactose intolerant by looking at them? No. But that's the physical reality caused in their body by their genes. That's a phenotype. So it's either physical appearance or the physical reality caused in the body by genes. It's the version of the trait that is caused by the organism's genes. Now, the other word that you might remember from middle school is genotype. The genotype is the actual genes that an organism has. It's its actual genetic makeup. Now, I gave you a whole big long DNA sequence here, but we don't talk about the whole DNA sequence when we talk about genotype. We just talk about versions of genes. And we usually use this sort of shorthand where we give them a letter and we assign a dominant and an allele, a dominant version with a capital letter, and we assign the recessive version with the lowercase letter. So the phenotype is the physical reality that the genes create in the body. The genotype are the actual genes that the organism has that underlie that. Okay, well, what's another word for different versions of genes? What is that? Because there are different versions of some genes, right? Yeah, alleles. An allele is one version of a gene. And within a population, there are lots of alleles floating around and getting traded. We have a name for that. The gene pool. The gene pool is all the genes and all the possible versions of those genes that exist in a population. You cannot go swimming in the gene pool. Hey, you, out of the gene pool. No, I don't mean that. Okay, so again, remember, versions of genes are called alleles. An allele is one particular version of a gene, and frequency is how often something happens. So allele frequency is how often a particular allele shows up in a population's gene pool. Oh, evolution, and this is the most modern definition of evolution, is changes in allele frequency in a population over many generations. So if a version of a gene becomes more common, or if it becomes less common, or if it disappears altogether, that's evolution. Whoa, cool. Allele frequency can be charted, and what we tend to see is that if there's an allele that gives an organism an advantage for survival, it becomes more common. If there is an allele that is harmful to an organism, that threatens their existence, that tends to become less common over time. Now let's talk about lactose intolerance. So we said lactose intolerance is a phenotype. It is the physical reality caused in the body by a gene. But the allele that would make someone lactose intolerant, or I'm sorry, lactose tolerant, because actually the minority of humans, about 30%, are lactose tolerant. The allele that allows humans to drink milk as adults, does that have an advantage? Ding, 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 ding. Of course it does. It's calories. It's one more source of calories. And for most of human history, remember, we've just been fighting not to starve to death. So anything that allows you another source of nutrients, it's a huge advantage. Hence why the gene that allows people to consume lactose became more common in the population pretty quickly when it first appeared. Okay. Does a changing distribution show an effect on phenotype or genotype? What do you think? If you were doing this as a pair deck, you'd be answering this question. So remember, what kind of things did we graph with distributions? Height, weight, foot size, pinky length. That sounds like phenotypes to me. In fact, changing distributions show the effect of changes in phenotype that are common in a population. So which one would be shown when you look at changes in the frequency of an allele in a population? Genotypes or phenotypes? Well, when you're looking at allele frequency, you're really looking more at the genotypes of the organisms in the population. Okay. Now, this is really important. I want to stress this, because I see it come up again and again in people's what-do-you-knows. Individuals can't evolve. You can't evolve. I can't evolve. That fern over there can't evolve. You can grow, you can change, you can develop, but you don't evolve. Evolution is a change in gene frequency in a population or in a species. You're not a species. You are a member of a species, but you're not a whole species. You're not a whole population. You could be a member of a population. One rabbit, one coyote, one maple tree, all of those individuals don't make up a whole population, and therefore they can't evolve. Only populations and species can evolve. You change over your lifetime, but the genes that you came into the world with are the same ones that you're going to keep. Okay, so we said that evolution is change in a species over time, a shift in distribution of a trait in a population or a species over time, change in allele frequency in a population or species over time. So how does that happen? What mechanisms could possibly change the frequency of a gene in a population? Wait, I think I remember something. Something is coming back to me. What is that thing that drives changing frequencies of alleles in populations that changes species? What is it? Natural selection! Yeah, it's the main mechanism of evolution. So the basics are this. All populations have natural variation. The environment presents challenges to survival and reproduction. It is hard to stay alive, not starve to death, and make sure your babies don't starve to death. And individuals tend to produce more offspring that are actually going to survive. Individuals with mutations or features that have some advantage for survival tend to pass on more of their genes. It's just the way it goes. So, can you summarize each of those 4 conditions in 3 to 4 words? You want to play along while I do it? Of course you do. I'm so glad you asked. So, all populations have natural selection. Everybody is different. That seems reasonable. The environment presents challenges to survival and reproduction. Life is hard. Yeah, of course. Individuals tend to produce more offspring than will survive. My personal favorite. Many will die. Don't think I should quit my job and become a horror movie announcer anytime soon? Okay. So the 4th one is the one that some smart student every year always goes, well, doesn't that just mean survival of the fittest? Yeah, it does. So individuals with mutations or features that have an advantage pass on more of their genes. Somebody said good genes win. That's a pretty good one too. It's survival of the fittest. If you've got an advantage, you make it. You pass that advantage on, and your offspring make it. Lucky, lucky. Okay, so thinking about natural selection, where can we see evolution happening super fast, super speed? Oh, I know. Remember these guys? Yeah, they're terrifying. So, did we have a population of bacteria over here in this original band? Of course we did. Are the traits in these individuals in this original population different from the traits that their descendants possess? Of course they are, or their descendants wouldn't be tolerating those levels of antibiotic. Are the frequencies of genes that are present in those individuals different than the ones in their descendants? Of course they are. That's evolution. We had a shift in the distribution of traits in a population. We had a shift in the frequency of specific genes in a population. Boom, this population evolved. That's it for the vocabulary discussion. So please make sure that you review the updated vocabulary list, and please make sure that you do all the learning activities to make sure you got these words. Have a good one.